In this video we're going to look at the new book, Ellisdons the History Volume 1, which is the first of two books on the history of the joke magic novelty firm Ellisdons, which is well known still today in the UK, and most think of it as a London-based company, as it was for the majority of its time when it was here, but it had a history almost as long in Australia and New Zealand before it came to Britain. So this book looks at their time, the family's time, and their companies in New Zealand and Australia, and the early years in London leading up to 1939. Prior to research for this, most people thought the company really was founded in the 30s. Well, it wasn't. It was founded in the 1890s. It was a very well-established mail-order firm before it came to England. So why did it come here? Well, let's have a look at some of the things they were doing when they were in Australia. So they traded in New Zealand. So basically the family were from London. So Albert Arthur, who was the founder of Ellisdons, was born in London, but when he was an infant they moved to New Zealand. His family moved to New Zealand, and he grew up and became a hawker, selling wares, and later founded his own barbershop where he would sell items, novelty items, pipes, things like that. And eventually he built this mail order empire in New Zealand, which got so large that he decided to move to Sydney in Australia to grow it even further. And it was there that he began selling all sorts of things through mail order using some questionable techniques. That's where he started. That's Auckland. That's where he ended up, in London. And so that's the first portion of the book, is looking at these things that occurred in Australasia. So I thought I'd look at an object from this time first. This actually is an object made in London, which is unusual considering we're talking about Australia, but the reason is one of his companies, so Ellisdons throughout their history have always had more than one sort of company underneath them. They've had numerous companies operating with different names under the Ellisdons banner, or rather not under the Ellisdons banner. People wouldn't generally know that they were connected to the firm. They'd just use addresses, different wholesale addresses and things to cover that up. And well, I say cover that up, but they weren't doing anything wrong. It was quite a common practice at the time. But in Australia they maybe were doing some things wrong, having said that. So this is the pocket rotoscope, which is a miniature stereoscopic viewer that was made in London in the very early 1900s, sort of 1905, 1906. And it folds out. I'm not going to do it here because it's a bit fiddly, but it folds out so that these lenses are eye width apart. That folds back, and you basically get a very hard to use but still operational stereoscopic viewer. Now these were a shilling, I believe. It says yes, they were a shilling at the time in London, but Ellisdon had an idea to make money off these, so he imported a whole load of them under his Anglo-Australian Importing Company brand, and he gave them away or sold them for a very bargain price. This is a drawing of the advertising image that he used. You can see a tiny little hand holding this thing, very much giving the impression of a full-size stereoscopic viewer. And this was typical of the sort of things he was doing at this time. He was doing too good to be true adverts in Sydney-based tabloids, essentially, and selling things mail order. Eventually he moved into selling records and record players that again were of some questionable quality, and he moved even further into the auction business. And I won't go into all the details here, but it created a bit of a stink, and there was a huge court case in which he was let off. He wasn't found to have committed any crimes, but his reputation was in tatters. So Albert decided that the family needed to move back to London, or the family decided that on his behalf, it's not really clear. And that's when Ellisdons in London was founded. Now, Ellisdons in London was a much fairer company. They didn't use the same any dishonesty, or at least it was all fair dishonesty, as was very typical of a lot of mail order firms at the time. And they moved into novelties, and they moved into jokes. Although they had been doing that in Australia, I should point out, it was a smaller part of their business than the mail order advertising based companies. So they stuck with something they knew, which was novelties. They'd already been selling things like Deland's packet tricks in Australia, and they continue to do that in the UK. So that's when they come to Britain. And in 1934, after doing a few adverts in newspapers selling novelties, they, 1934, they had their first catalogue printed, and it was printed by Davenport's. Now, this isn't one of their catalogues. This is an almost identical version of the catalogue, but printed for Davenport's themselves, so it's got the Davenport name. In the book, you'll find pictures of the original catalogue, the Ellisdons catalogue made by Davenport's. That was very kindly loaned to me by the Davenport collection for research for the book. And but this is the same adverts, but under a different banner. And let's have a look at this. Well, I thought we'd look at some of the tricks they were selling in this first Ellisdon's novelty and joke catalogue. Mainly, you can see we've got cigarette effects, or rather cigarette tricks. We've got some match jokes, novelty glasses and the like. So let's have a look at some of them. These are typical of the cigarette tricks that Ellisdons and Davenport's were selling at the time. I thought we'd look at these two just because they're quite easy to identify the manufacturers of. So these Navy Cut cigarette ones, Navy Cut was a real brand in the UK. So this would have looked to most people like a real pack of cigarettes. They were made by Heschinger, which was a short-lived German company in Nuremberg, which was the centre of metal toy manufacturing and therefore like novelty manufacturing as well, because jokes, although they're maybe not technically toys, they were made in the same factories. This is a rather delicate Heschinger list from the early 30s. They specialised in clockwork and cigarette tricks, and here you can see some of their range of joke cigarette boxes with this Navy Cut cigarette branding. You could also, obviously, if you were ordering an awful lot of them, like Davenport's for instance, where they would have their own custom packaging made that would have Demon on them. I think they had Ogden's type cigarette boxes that said Demon Gold Flake. I've got some in the cupboard over there, but I can't remember exactly what they say. But you could obviously, if you're ordering a lot, you could have them say what you like. And this is oh, there's some more on the back there as well. This is a what magicians would know as a drawer box. So you can see there's no cigarettes in there sometimes, and there are when you want there to be. And of course you could take one out yourself and then offer them to your friend who would not be able to get any. So that's a sort of typical example. And as well as German exports or imports, you had Japanese ones. So this is quite a popular graphic brand. I forget the name, I do have it written down, but this is a Japanese novelty company who again did mainly cigarettes, and this was a very popular joke. So you'd again offer the cigarette, and when the person came to try and get it out, they would find they couldn't pick the cigarette up as it's behind a sheet of glass. So there are loads of different variations on that. Another popular one, this is actually a little box of original stock from a joke shop. This was unsold stock, which is why there's so many in here. These are exploding cigarettes. So you would pull this little spring lever back and put a percussion cap in there, a toy gun cap. That would go into the packet of cigarettes, and when the person pulled that cigarette out, the spring would release and the thing would explode and give them the fright of their life for being so cheeky as to ask for a cigarette. There you go. I mean, they don't sell many cigarette novelties anymore for obvious reasons. Here's another variation on the theme. This is a German brand of matches. and when you would open this, a shower of sparks would fire out of this small hole here. I'll just wind it up. The flint is not engaged in here, so it won't spark, but you can get an idea of the power of the little thing. So that spins around at high speed and would fire sparks out. And again, if you believed it was a box of matches, that would be quite frightening. That's all made in tin plate, so it's not, there's no cardboard in that at all. But they weren't all smoking related. This era was when you also got classics such as the squirting ring. So you'd this rubber has oxidized now, so you can't squish it, but that would be worn on the finger, and if someone admired it, you could then with your palm push this little bulb and it would squirt water at them. I don't know if I can focus on that, but that's a nice thing. And then there were sort of carnival based novelties that were big sellers for Ellisdons. Hats, streamers, and novelty googly eye glasses like this. These again are German manufacture, made in a cellulose nitrate, an early plastic. Highly flammable plastic, so if you do have any of these in your collection, keep them away from your spotlights. They go up in a very dangerous manner. This catalogue also features this little item for the first time. This is the Seebackroscope. I'll just get the original advert up. You can see here there's people looking over their shoulders by magic with this little device. And there's I'll show you the Ellisdons advert used for this. Is here. So you can see the device was a bit squarer, these early ones, some of them anyway. And this man is looking through the back of his head at this young couple kissing. So you could use it for some pretty dodgy reasons, it would appear, in the 1930s. And all it is a little plastic monocle that would just fit over your eye and be held in place with your cheek. And at the end of it there's a sort of a small tube at the end of which is an angled mirror, and this would allow you to look over your shoulder. Not quite out the back of your head, but sort of angled behind you. These were huge sellers for Ellisdons for many years. In fact, I'd venture to say until their very last catalogue. And you also get to sort of see behind sunglasses now. That's the derivation of this. So let's look at their next catalogue. Or rather, this is two catalogues later, but it has the same cover. These are I've had these bound like this, so this is just to keep them in good condition. This is so they would have just been loose in their paper covers. So this is their second catalogue. You can now see they're settled in their beautiful building, 246 High Holborn. That's just the left-hand side. They would later own both sides. Ellisdon and Son, of course, at this time. They weren't called Ellisdons at this stage. They were called Ellisdon and Son. Interestingly, that's not Albert, the father, and Ernest, the son. That's Ernest, the father, and Bryce, the son. Because Albert was not on the board of this company, probably because of issues to do with Australia, but you'll have to read the book to understand all of that. Here you can start to see brilliant, exciting catalogue, vibrant images, a lot of these drawn by Bryce, the son, who was the son of Ernest, who was a very talented artist, and did all sorts of things with that in terms of advertising art, but also in terms of creating a brilliant course on learning how to draw that was sold mail order by the firm, which I've just managed to get a copy of, so that will be featuring in the second book. So you can see some magic appearing now as well. There was some magic in the previous one, but this is with their own artwork. Oops, that's for later. So I thought I'd show you this item, for instance, the numerical marble. A nice little German imported item where you can have your numbers placed in any order and predict, or rather, without opening the box, tell which order they've been placed. So these are the sorts of effects they were getting from Germany, importing themselves, or maybe wholesaling them from Davenports, buying them wholesale from Davenports. Probably a mixture of both in reality. So at this time they weren't manufacturing many magic tricks, but they were manufacturing some. And we also have the appearance of Ventrilo in here, which was one of the all-time bestsellers for the firm. This is the earliest version I have. I've got some later ones with illustrated packets, but the cloth has gone from this. But it does still, you won't be able to see it on camera, but it does still say Ventrilo on there, which they registered as a trademark. And they would issue those with these, one of these, that's a slightly later one of these booklets on how to perform ventriloquism. Of course, the Ventrilo itself is a bird warbler. It helps you impersonate the sounds of different birds and do other effects, so it doesn't really make you into a ventriloquist. But you wouldn't know that from the way it was advertised. That's an interesting thing about the book, actually. When novelties have been around for a long time in the history, they're separated out in the book with these double-lined sections, so that the whole book is chronologically written, but if you want to just read about a special novelty for the firm, you can do that, and it will cover everything about it across the firm's whole history. So it's really good reference for novelties in general, as well as for the history of the specific firm. So that's Ventrilo, and then other magic effects they had with things like the Mystic Ring. I've picked this out from my Ellisdons cupboard because it's got Adams artwork. So at this time they were using a lot of artwork from S.S. Adams, the American firm, the American magic and joke firm, which is very much Adams were very much the equivalent of Ellisdons in America. And I just thought it'd be nice to show that in time they stopped using Adams artwork and introduced their own, such as this by Bryce again, I think. And there are American connections with Ellisdons everywhere. One of the most surprising is with Johnson Smith, which was the big mail order firm in the States, and there is a connection between Johnson Smith and Ellisdons, which I think will amaze anyone who reads it, because they go back a lot further than you might expect. In fact, a lot further than I think some people knew Johnson Smith even went back. So if you're interested in novelties in America, there is a lot of crossover in the book about Ellisdons, Johnson Smith and S.S. Adams. And another thing, when I was saying earlier that Ellisdons didn't really make their own magic at this period, they did make these. This was the first appearance of magic cards, generally known as mocha. So these are Ellisdon's own marked cards. They're heavily based on Deland decks of cards, and indeed if you look in, I won't get them out now, I'll just show they have a flower pattern which might be familiar to some if they understand the Deland's deck. They were retailed at Davenport's for the same price. Davenport's stocked these in the late 30s and sold them for the same price as Deland's decks. And they are a well-made deck. They were made by who were they made by? I'm going to look that up. I guess that's the other advantage of this book, is it does actually have an index. So if you're in doubt, you can find things. They were made by Delarue, which is one of the leading card manufacturers here in the UK. I thought I'd also show something from the period that wasn't a catalogue item at this stage, but did become one. This was a series of books that Ellisdons actually purchased the rights to from a company called Mail Order Services. And these were extortionately expensive. They were 20 shillings, which is a huge amount of money for a paperback book at the time. Bearing in mind, you know, the cost of printing and everything, then it's a staggering price. But these are books that essentially purport to allow you to win at betting through their system. Obviously, it's very questionable whether it would work, but these were massive sales. I just thought I'd bring these out because these were huge sellers for the firm right up until the 1970s. So that's just an interesting side note that they started that early. We're going to move on to their next catalogue, the last one we're going to look at in this video. And that's this catalogue, which was the last one the firm produced before the Second World War. This is the 1939 catalogue. I can't remember if I said the last catalogue was the 1937 catalogue. So this is 1939, and there's an original order form from it. Here they've expanded massively. They've got so much more stuff in here. They've also started organising the catalogue a bit better with some thematic sections of magic and jokes separated out. But I thought I'd concentrate on the magic a little bit first. This is, oh, that's interesting. So they've got the Ernest Sewell range of magic sets. This is the first catalogue where they actually have their own magic sets. I'll show you more of that later. They've got the magic cards we just mentioned. They are selling Deland's cards there as well. There's many more professional tricks in here. The Cabinet of Card Miracles, we're going to look at that in a moment. Here we go, this is what I was looking for. They published their first magic book at this stage, Modern Conjuring. Now, Modern Conjuring by J.C. Cannell was the name of a much smaller book they published later, which a lot of people will know about. But this is the original. I'm just going to swap these around. This is Modern Conjuring by J.C. Cannell. Gorgeous book. And it's really interesting because this is actually all taken from Pearson books, the C. Arthur Pearson range of magic books. And they basically had Cannell make a more general, larger book of tricks by chopping and changing those. So that was the first magic book published by the firm. Interestingly, it has the firm's real name at this stage, anyway, E.G. Ellisdon Limited. At this point in the late 30s they were called E.G. Ellisdon, even though they continued to brand their catalogues Ellisdon and Son. That's a boring side note. But let's have a look at some of the tricks that they had in the catalogue. So this is the first magic set that Ellisdon's issued. It's really quite nice. It's got artwork on the front, a mixture of Ellisdon's redrawn artwork from Deland and Adams adverts. And there inside, I think the instructions are on the inside of the lid, and you've got your packet tricks, nicely printed on thin cardstock, thin smooth cardstock. These aren't made by De La Rue, these are made in-house, I believe, or at least commissioned from a normal printers, not a card specialist printers. And really beautiful printed bands to say which tricks are. So that's the first magic set made by the firm, of many, many. And while we're at it, we might as well have a look at the first joke set they issued. Now, these are surprisingly easy to find. They issued this early, but they kept it in production for a long time. And this was actually the joke set you could buy at Woolworths in the 1940s as well. And they're really beautiful. Again, printed interior with each effect in its own special spot. Yeah, really lovely. And Bryce's artwork again on all the packaging there. So they ended up becoming one of the biggest set manufacturers in the UK for magic and joke sets. I just thought I'd end on two of their big sellers in 1939. One is the vamping chart. You'll usually find these in a yellow packet that was the latest sort of packet. This is the original packet with the full colour lady on there. And it's a kind of cheat sheet for vamping. Vamping is sort of the equivalent of playing chords on the guitar, I guess. I'm not really a musical person. But you'd actually stand this up on your piano and follow the colour. Once you knew the start of the chord, once you knew the key rather, you could vamp pretty much any tune with this. And they were really popular, massive seller for the firm. Again, this is actually something that you could get in Australia before they came here. But I thought that would be a nice thing to show. And the last thing I'm going to show is this very odd device that is actually patented by Ernest Ellisdon. and this is a real one. It took me a long time to find one of these. This is a cigarette roller. This isn't a trick, it isn't a joke. This would allow you to roll your own cigarettes. It's a bit rusty. And this is the packaging. It's obviously been kept in somewhere very damp, a shed or a loft or something. This is the packaging for it, the OK cigarette machine. You can see the drawing of it there, and E&S London on the end flap of the box there. These were made by someone who made a lot of novelties for the firm, a guy called Jack Claw. There's a blog post on collectingmagic.co.uk about Jack Claw if you're interested. I hope you've enjoyed having a look at some objects connected to Ellisdons The History Volume 1. If you'd like to purchase this book, it's available exclusively from collectingmagicbooks.com. That's collectingmagicbooks.com. I'll put a link in the description where you can purchase. It's a hardback book. It's got a nice coloured plate section. It's fully indexed. A lot of work went into it, and I think it's a story that's really interesting, and there's a lot of stuff in here that you might not have known about this unusual company. And the second volume will be out this year, but I'd encourage you to get volume 1 now, and then you've got something to look forward to maybe for next Christmas. If there's any questions or anything, just leave a comment below, or you can use the contact bar on collectingmagicbooks.com. Thanks for watching.